Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Literacy Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Downs. I'm an elementary literacy coordinator, a PhD graduate from Utah State University, and someone who wants to know just a little bit more about reading. Before we get to today's show, just a few items of business. You might have heard just barely that my position title has changed. I've spent the past year working as an instructional coach for the school district that I work for, and I'm very fortunate and very excited to be now working as the literacy coordinator for all of our grades K-6. So it's an exciting opportunity for me to work and try to support teachers and support bridging literacy research into practice, which is something I'm a big believer in and very passionate about. Welcome to summer. I hope your summer is going well, and I salute you for getting some professional learning in during your summer break. Otherwise, if you're listening to this at some other point that's not summer, I hope things are going well for you in your classroom. I'm very excited about today's episode. Today I interviewed somebody who has been on my radar for several years and someone I've been wanting to get on the podcast. And when I heard that this book was being released, I got the book ordered as quick as I could, and I've spent time reading it, and I'm very glad to have this interview ready for you today. The guest I'm bringing onto the show is Dr. Seth Parsons. Dr. Seth Parsons is a professor of literacy at George Mason University, and he recently edited a book with Dr. Margaret Vaughn, who's been on the show before, and the book's titled Principles of Effective Literacy Instruction, Grades K-5. One of the reasons I was really excited about this book is typically when I'm interviewing researchers on the show, we're typically talking about peer review articles, and those are generally behind a paywall, or they're written in academic speak, and so they're a little less accessible to practicing teachers. This book, however, is written by researchers specifically for practitioners, and so there's 22 chapters, and each chapter is written by an expert in that particular area. And if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you'll see many names on the table of contents that we've had here on the show. Dr. Chase Young, for example, Ray Reitzel, Sarah Clark, Margaret Vaughn, she has a chapter, and she also helped edit the book. So that was exciting to see a lot of familiar faces. So we talked today specifically about this book. I highly encourage you to go out and buy it. It's relatively cheap. I bought it on Amazon. You can get it wherever you buy education books, I'm sure. So sit back and enjoy the show, and stick around after the interview for my 2 cents on the topic. Dr. Seth Parsons, welcome to the Teaching Literacy Podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. This is I'm excited.
So we're talking about a book that you and Dr. Margaret Vaughn edited, and it's titled Principles of Effective Literacy Instruction, Grades K through 5. Before we get into the book, can you give us some background for how the book was conceived and developed, and sort of the process with getting this book even published?
Sure. So Margaret and I are both committed, passionate teacher educators who, in our work, try to prepare elementary teachers to be highly effective when they enter the field and be prepared to enter this lifelong learning, a profession that is always learning and growing. So we try to give them the skills to do that. And we've been friends a long time, so we often compare notes with what we're doing in our pre-service classes and texts we're using and that sort of thing. And one thing we noticed is that existing texts for pre-service and in-service teacher education and literacy tend to focus on teaching methods, like instructional methods, how to teach phonics, for example. You have a chapter of what phonics is and how to do it. And it seems really, those are excellent texts to have. But we were thinking about the complexity of what classrooms entail, and the idea that teachers have to be responsive and flexible in the classroom, and really be able to think on your feet with the students that you're serving and the diverse needs they bring to you. And we've often spoken about the idea of principles. So if teachers can understand principles of how kids learn to read and what type of instruction helps to fulfill those skills that students need, then they can apply them flexibly to that complex and ever-changing environment of classroom reading and writing instruction. And that sort of led to the idea of this book, that we need the methods types of books that are often used in pre-service classes, but we thought that this would be a complementary text where we can sort of take a step back and say, what are these principles that teachers need to have in their minds when they're trying to apply instruction that is constantly changing and evolving?
One of the things that attracted me to this book was the handbook style of it. And that's an approach you see that's more common in academia, where there's one topic and then different chapters are written by different researchers that have expertise in that field. But that's less common in publications that are meant more for teacher consumption. So I assume that was a deliberate structure, a deliberate aspect that you wanted to bring on into this book. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So we had all these different components that we wanted to speak to, and we wanted to bring various experts in to bring in a diverse perspectives and points of view and really dive into the topics in depth. And we really challenged each chapter author because we wanted it to be relatively succinct. We presented this text, as I just described to you, as sort of a complementary text, not one that would be a standalone text necessarily. In retrospect, we think it could, but the way that we sort of conceptualized it was, don't have the methods textbook. So we want it to be complementary. So therefore, we really want to get to the point and keep each chapter really short. So we challenge the authors to do that. So succinct but comprehensive chapters on each of the designated topics. And while Margaret and I, we have vast knowledge of literacy, we wanted to make sure that we had multiple voices and different perspectives at the table. So we invited chapter authors who demonstrated clear expertise in that topic to really dive deep and present what they felt would be, captured that principle of effective literacy instruction.
And I appreciate that the chapters are pretty succinct. I could read a chapter in about 20 minutes, and it was a really good way for me to get some breadth. And I appreciate the focus of principles that you and Dr. Vaughn focused on. On the back, there's a quote by Gerald Duffy, who I'm just a huge Duffy fan here, but he says on the back of the book, I've learned from both my research and my more than 50 years of working with K-5 classroom teachers that teaching reading is a complex creative process based in principles, not rules. And that's something that you and Dr. Vaughn have both written about extensively, is instructional adaptations according to the complex dynamic environment of teachers. And it sounds like that focus on principles was a response to that, of giving teachers sort of a framework that they can then implement and use to leverage instruction and make literacy happen within their classroom.
Yes, absolutely. And in the name of full transparency, Jerry Duffy is my mentor and also Margaret. So that's how Margaret and I came to be friends and colleagues, and we met in our PhD program where we both studied under the mentorship of Jerry Duffy. And that's certainly something, that sort of philosophy that effective instruction, especially effective literacy instruction, can't be scripted. It can't be captured in any sort of program because kids, the reading process in classrooms are far too complex to have some sort of mechanical or rote instruction to elevate students' literacy skills. So that philosophy that you sort of outlined there is something that I know that Margaret, Jerry, and I all subscribe to after spending so much time in classrooms with teachers and with kids.
The book is divided into three major parts. There's the first part that talks about the reading environment. The second part talks about reading instruction, and there's a short conclusion part that talks about teachers as being reflective and as lifelong learners. So as we go throughout the interview, we'll kind of just highlight chunks from each of those different sections. So perhaps we'll start with environment. So there's 3 or 4 chapters in that section. Based on what those authors wrote, what role does the environment play in supporting literacy instruction, and what might a teacher consider when they're trying to design a classroom environment that can facilitate literacy achievement for their students?
Yeah, so the classroom environment in which literacy instruction takes place is an important consideration because it can really facilitate literacy learning. And if we think about the primary grades, just having a very print-rich environment with labels and lots of text and student created and classroom created sort of anchor charts and things like that students can attend to, word walls, that sort of environment that really just floods text into the kindergarten, first grade classroom is supportive for students learning, the basic building blocks of words and how words work. So having that environment doesn't replace instruction clearly, but it certainly complements it. And in addition, across all grade levels in elementary schools, we know that time is the most precious commodity in schools, and there's never enough. So running an efficient, well-organized classroom is absolutely critical to highly effective literacy instruction. And if we think through how elementary classrooms work, they're often in the literacy block, you'll have centers or stations, because the teacher is often pooling small groups for small group differentiated instruction or meeting individually with kids. Just due to the vast diversity of student needs, that's an effective way of differentiating. But that leaves the rest of the class. You have 20 plus kids who are working on independent work. And I know for myself, far too often I've seen that work to be mindless, rote, busy work, just to keep them busy so the teacher can work with those 5 kids sitting in front of her, how many. And we've also seen where it can be highly effective and students are engaged in meaningful, independent work that is pushing their literacy learning. And to do that, you need to have knowledge of how to set routines, procedures, and activities that facilitate such an organization. So we can either maximize that use of time to facilitate differentiated instruction or lose it. And that's why that environment chapter is just so critical.
Yeah, I was struck by that one too. It stuck out to me because Ray Reitzel and Sarah Clark, who've both been on the podcast before, wrote that chapter. So that was one of the first ones I read. And I, if you only have 90, 120 minutes in a reading block, a teacher really needs to make full use and maximal use of that time. And certainly a large component that's going to be with their, pedagogical understanding of literacy instruction, progression, development, and that. But just the management aspect of, if I've got 28 kids, 30 kids, how do I balance that? The needs of different groups of kids, and expert teachers can do that. It's challenging. It's really complex and hard, but that is certainly an aspect to it, is how do we make the best use of time that we have given to us to make sure that instruction and literacy support for our kids can happen. Moving on to the second part, the part 2 with instruction is the majority of the book. There's 16 chapters on instruction. And while there's certainly chapters that we would expect to see, like phonemic awareness and phonics, fluency, comprehension, vocabulary, there really is, there's 16 chapters. There's a real breadth of chapters on literacy instruction and on topics that might not, typically appear in a teacher level, a practitioner oriented text. Can you speak to the curation of the wide selection of chapters of instruction and why you feel that was a necessary component to this book?
Sure. And that's a product of several Skype meetings like this, or Zoom meetings between Margaret and I. Margaret's on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. So we have to use electronic conversation. But in planning this book and the structure, we had lots of conversations about, again, focusing on our pre-service teachers and the teachers we work with in the classrooms that we, local schools that we work with. We're thinking what's absolutely critical and what's most timely. What do the teachers entering the workforce today need to know? And these are the chapters we came up with. And I think that the breadth of chapters speaks to the complexity of the work. And we have the traditional 5 pillars, which are absolutely necessary to teach and have unequivocal research background to demonstrate that they are necessary for teaching and learning how to read. So we made sure that those were included and that we gave appropriate attention to those essential aspects of literacy learning. But we also have other chapters on, student engagement in reading, what types of activities are being assigned during literacy blocks, autonomy, supportive classrooms. And those 3 chapters really focus on motivation and engagement. So really getting kids to learn to love to read and write, which we see as an important aspect of literacy learning. We would hate to develop a generation of kids who could read but don't read, because that's not productive, not doing our jobs well as teachers. And then we have the components of literacy instruction like intervention and explicit teaching and differentiation to make sure that we're reaching all learners, not just middle of the road and also not just the struggling readers, but that we are meeting kids where they are and helping all of them move forward in our classroom. And that's, as you mentioned, we have 25, 30 kids in our classroom, and that's a big task before teachers. So we wanted to cover that breadth to help teachers reach all students. And, in that regard, we have chapters on culturally responsive literacy instruction and approaches to critical literacy, because we feel that those are vital components of a literacy instructional approach as well, if we are going to accomplish that goal of optimizing the instruction for all kids that we serve in schools today.
The breadth there is impressive, and there were several. I mean, I've got stars next to chapters. I was like, yeah, I want to look at this, go back and look at this one again, and I almost have more stars than not stars. So I was really impressed by the breadth there. One chapter I wanted to highlight specifically was the chapter on explicit instruction by Dr. Dana A. Robertson. And explicit instruction it's a term that at times can mean different things to different people, and sometimes it evokes some emotion one way or another. But I really appreciated the clarity with which Dr. Robertson explained explicit instruction. And so on page 137, Dr. Robertson says, explicit instruction is intentional teaching. What does he mean by that? And what misconceptions did you feel that this chapter cleared up around explicit instruction?
Sure. I absolutely love that chapter. Dana is an excellent scholar who has done great work on struggling readers and intervening with kids. He's got a background as a instructional coach, a reading coach. So he had responsibility for helping teachers grow, but also helping students become effective. And the chapter that he created was really noteworthy. I love it. But he does a great job of explaining what explicit teaching is and what is not, in the sense that explicit teaching is very direct, and it's where the teacher is in control and giving kids the skills and strategies that they need to do. And it's really, he hones in on something that Jerry Duffy really focused on in his book, Explaining Reading, where a lot of kids, when they're struggling to learn to read, it's sort of like this secret that they don't understand. You have the struggling reader in the classroom who's sitting around and watching their classmates get it. They read books, they understand what they're doing, and meanwhile the child looks at the page, maybe sounding out the words, and nothing's making sense. And there's some secret that this student's missing out on. And that's where Jerry really focused on his book, and Dana sort of built upon that, saying that in those cases, we need to show kids the secret. And there's no better way than saying, hey, this is how you do X, this skill. So if you're going to teach main idea, here I'm going to pull back the curtain on main idea and show you how to do it. To do the main idea, you have to do 1, 2, and 3. Here, watch me as I find the main idea of this paragraph, and then modeling the process for them. We have the old tried and true, nothing beats a good model. And I think that that's absolutely true. And that's what Margaret and I sort of had in mind when we were thinking of this chapter, is, again, pulling back that curtain and showing kids who don't get it, show them how to do it. We can't expect kids to discover how to learn. So it's incumbent on the teacher to show them. And yes, we can support literacy development through text-rich environment and lots of stories and read-alouds and lots of choices for kids to read. And we promote that 100%. But that needs to be complemented with teaching kids exactly what the steps are to complete a skill or strategy. And a masterful thing that I think Dana points out in that chapter is that explicit teaching sort of had this reputation of being rote skills disconnected from actual text, connected text. And he makes the point repeatedly throughout the chapter that this sort of explicit teaching, where the teacher is in charge and the teacher is modeling and showing students how to complete a skill or strategy, that needs to take place in connected text so that that connection is made. Otherwise, students may, if they spend all their time at the letter level or the word level or the sentence level, they're not going to understand what it means to actually read. What is this act of reading? So I love that he contextualizes it within authentic text that's relevant to kids. That's where explicit teaching should take place, not on a worksheet or skill or drill, which is sort of the primary misconception that I think exists in that area.
Yeah, in the end, we're always trying to scaffold towards connected text because that is literacy. And I so appreciated that word intentional just struck me so clearly as we're just being very clear. We know what the students need, and we're going to provide the support, the scaffold, the instruction for that. And I thought that was an excellent chapter. Something else that caught my eye, and this probably will end up meandering back to that connected text component, but I wish I would have counted, but I was interested in how often read alouds were mentioned across chapters, and even very diverse chapters across the instruction block within this. So why do you think so many different researchers in different areas invoked read alouds as a way to provide support for students? And what considerations do you think a teacher might have when crafting a read aloud that would be productive for students?
Sure. Well, read alouds are so effective because they're so diverse in what they can accomplish. So if you think about doing a read aloud with your elementary class, it can be done simply to build community or enjoy a good story together as a class. Something as simple as that, but also a way to set the day. Like, this is the tone for the day. We're a group. We're in this together. We're going to enjoy this good story. But it can also be used to teach comprehension strategies in a contextualized fashion, or it could be used to show different perspectives on individuals, or show differences in what kids and cultures and languages and backgrounds that kids have. Books can serve as a window into others' worlds to try to promote a more, just classroom and society with kids. A read aloud can be used to teach, intentional word choice for writing. So it can be like an author's craft as like a model mentor text for kids. So there's so much that text can be used for. And there's so much great children's literature out there. The books that are being produced currently are just tremendous for telling stories, exposing kids to diverse backgrounds and different places in the world and then society. So it really helps to build background knowledge. It models fluent language, and it's just an opportunity to hit the variety of different components of what it means to be literate. And it does so, like we were talking about previously, in an authentic, connected text, not totally detached from what real reading and writing actually is.
I think what caught my eye about it, a read aloud for oral language support has been a little bit of a hobby horse of mine lately. And I think that's why I kept sort of seeing it in all these different chapters. But what really clicked with me was the stacked nature of a read aloud, how it can absolutely provide just engagement with a good book, but we can also stack in, okay, now we're building background knowledge. Okay, and we're also modeling fluency. Oh, and we can provide oral language and comprehension support. And so it doesn't have to just, be the reading for engagement, but it's very easy to stack all of those in there. And because the teacher's doing the reading, it's a really great scaffold. It's everyone in that classroom can access that text, and with really with teacher facilitated instruction can really provide some rich support in reading without having to decode every single thing. And that's something that really clicked with me, that read alouds can really be very multifaceted to meet lots of different instructional goals.
Yeah, and you just made a good point that I didn't even articulate. But yes, another one is the, freeing kids of that cognitive load of decoding in the primary grades, so they can attend to more of the higher level thinking associated with comprehension and fluency and vocabulary development. So.
Another term, so similar to explicit instruction, there's another term that I think carries can mean different things to different people, and that's the term student autonomy. And this is a chapter that you actually helped co-author, and I love this chapter too. And you and your co-authors write on page 227 that autonomy is not synonymous with independence. That is, autonomy support does not mean students are given free rein. So autonomy isn't complete independence, or isn't free rein for the students just to go and discover everything. Can you help clarify what autonomy is and provide a few principles that teachers can use to support student autonomy within their classroom?
Sure. And just a little background on how that topic came to be. And as we were formulating topics for, coming up with the table of contents, we even shared the table of contents with several colleagues who are literacy scholars and teacher educators. And, we said, is there anything missing here? Like, did Margaret and I miss something? And one thing that multiple people pointed out was, like, you don't have a chapter on motivation. And that was intentional, because we sort of saw motivation as being so important that to put in a chapter sort of makes it feel separate, and we see it infused throughout. So we ended up doing 3 sort of chapters that really get at the affective side of reading, in addition to the cognitive side that comes with the skills and strategies associated with reading. And so we have a chapter on engaging students with text. Gay Ivey and Erica Gray wrote that wonderful chapter. Then we also have a chapter on academic tasks, and Roya Scales and I have talked a lot about tasks over the years, and she's an excellent teacher, educator, scholar who has knowledge about what are we asking kids to do in classrooms, and what messages are we sending about reading and writing based upon those activities. And that relates to how kids come to see text, and also relates to their motivation. And then our chapter on autonomy support comes from, the field of educational psychology and motivation, really getting at the sense of the classroom environment and, how kids operate within an environment. And the self-determination theory lens of motivation that really speaks to me. That I think it's a comprehensive theory of motivation that really looks holistically at what it means to be motivated. And within that theory, they talk about autonomous learning situations and controlled learning situations. And when individuals, including students, are in controlled learning situations, it really undermines motivation, because you are doing someone else's bidding, whereas autonomy sort of the individual feels like they're in control of their own destiny, in which case motivation is heightened. So to be frank, we've never seen a chapter on autonomy support related to literacy, teaching, and learning, but it's absolutely vital if we think about engaging kids in the act of reading and writing. And you can speak with any elementary school teacher. You're a teacher. Motivation is a central concern. It's not always the most, but it's up there. If you were going to say what are your top 5 issues that you have in your classroom, I would venture that most motivation would make that list for most teachers. But autonomy support is the idea that students are behaving in a way that aligns with their goals, values, and interests. So the more that we can arrange our literacy instruction in such a way that students come to value literacy and see literacy as something that is of interest to them, we can take reading from being a chore, which it is for many kids, to being a highly enjoyable activity, which I personally believe it inherently is. Something that I highlight in all my courses is that reading is inherently enjoyable. There's something about human beings that are really drawn to stories, and whether it's our history of oral storytelling or what, but there's something about being human that is really drawn to stories. So if kids hate to read, it's not that they hate to read, it's that they haven't found the right book yet. And they also haven't had experienced school in such a way in which their psychological needs are met. And that's where autonomy support comes in. Some principles for supporting autonomy in a literacy classroom would include lots of choice, where students are engaging in texts and writing on topics, and where they have some decision making in what's taking place. Also, the idea of relevance is really central to supporting students' autonomy. This is nothing new. We've long known as teachers that if we can make content relevant to students' real lives, we're far more likely to get their attention. But now we have theoretical and empirical backing demonstrating that when we do that, we're enhancing students' learning and their motivation, which is what's the cycle we want. The more motivated kids are, the more likely they're to engage, and the more they engage, the better their success. So motivation and achievement are two sides of the same coin, and attending the students' autonomy needs is one means of approaching both sides of the coin.
I thought one of the strengths of the chapter that you highlight is there is a bit of a balance where there are certainly times where the teacher, where there might not be choice allowed in a specific thing, where it's just this is what we're all doing, and but that trying to find times to incorporate meaningful choice will probably get a lot more bang for your buck than just having sort of ad hoc or low value choices. So being intentional about maybe the way they show their show learning from a particular book or story. Maybe there's different formats they can do that in, or perhaps even some autonomy with texts that are selected or specific topics that are read or investigated. But by providing by integrating that balance of providing choice where the teacher can, and provide choice that's meaningful, that to give students some ownership over what they're learning and where they're headed. I thought that was a really powerful chapter that helped frame it well within the complexity and dynamics of regular classroom instruction.
Thank you. And I will make a point, we tried to be very clear in the chapter that we don't suggest that all of the classroom instruction is going to fit that bill, in the sense that there's times when there is going to be a controlled environment in which students don't have any choices. But the problem is when that's all the time. So if kids are always in controlled environments, that's when you see the total disconnection from school and reading and writing altogether. So it is very much a balance. It's not an all or none when speaking to autonomy supportive versus controlled environments. So I do want to highlight that we're not in a fantasy world where everything is highly engaging and motivating, but it's the balance. It shouldn't be always the opposite.
The closing of the book, the last section is specifically on teachers, and I thought the book just wrapped up really nicely. The last chapter in the instruction section was from Dr. Margaret Vaughn, and we've had her on the podcast to talk about adaptive teaching, and then it transitions to part 3 with teachers, where there's a chapter on reflective practice, and then a final chapter on teachers as lifelong learners. And I left reading the book feeling very, almost empowered with, it's a lifelong journey for all of us, right? The kids are on a lifelong journey, but even as teachers, learning to teach reading is a lifelong journey, and the research is evolving, and it's a lot to sort of grapple with, but there's there's a process that we can continue to elevate our practice. And obviously reflective practice has been something that's been recognized for decades, and I think they cite John Dewey in there for 100 years of being an essential component of good teaching. But what does more recent research reveal about how teachers can be reflective and the impact that reflective teaching can have on student learning outcomes?
Yeah, so being a reflective teacher, well, I'll take a step back even further. Margaret and I are huge proponents of teachers. Both of us have been classroom teachers, and we are teacher advocates, and we advocate for teacher autonomy. We advocate for teacher knowledge, supporting teachers, and removing barriers to effective instruction. And we feel that enhanced knowledge and enhanced reflection and more time and more collaboration among teachers is what allows teachers to fulfill this absolutely essential role in society. So we are huge supporters of teachers, and we feel that reflective practice really puts the onus of teaching and learning where it belongs with the classroom teacher. It doesn't come from standards. It doesn't come from policymakers. It doesn't come from administrators. It comes from the teachers who work with those 30 kids day in and day out for 180 days a year. So the more that we can support teachers in becoming reflective practitioners is what allows them to operate within the highly idiosyncratic context of each individual classroom with the unique 30 kids that they serve each year. And as well as all teachers do, that the next class that you have next year is going to compel you to rethink everything. Yes, there are principles of effective instruction, but it's going to change based upon the personalities, the strengths, the background knowledge, the language proficiencies, the cultures that students bring. All of that is going to influence what it looks like. And you can't just, press repeat and do last year over again and expect success. So that reflective piece is absolutely a vital part of what it means to be a teacher. And as far as current research on reflective practice, I think the field and the profession have come a long way in recognizing that teaching is a collaborative endeavor. And even back when I was in the classroom, there was a lot of just closing your door and, doing your thing. And that's just not the way schools operate anymore. And thank goodness, because that wasn't the best approach. So the idea that we're in this together, so whether it's a grade level team or even cross grade level, sort of the tiered collaborations, or whether it's topical collaborations where everyone focuses on comprehension, for example, but this is a collaborative endeavor. So now we have structures in schools often where there are collaborative learning teams. I've heard about CLTs, professional learning communities, PLCs, teacher study groups, whatever the name. The idea is that teachers have time and space to work together in that reflective act. And that can look like 1,000 different things, whether it's a book study, an article study, or lesson study, or child study. But when you bring professionals together to reflect on their own practice and solve problems of practice, everybody learns and grows, which is what the profession requires. And that's how we do it right. I fear far too many initiatives and policies try to like force feed content or force feed instructional approaches. And that's just not going to work because of the complexity and the diversity of classrooms and kids that we talked about since the outset. So if we can move away from that and move towards giving teachers more time, giving teachers more resources, giving teachers the ability to work together to engage in reflective practice collaboratively, I think we'll be far better off in enhancing all students' reading and writing.
Yeah, in Dr. Vaughn's chapter, where she wrote about adaptive teaching, she provided a model that I haven't seen it, so I'm not sure if it's new specifically in this text or just newer from her work, but where she talks about that there's sort of there's a process that or there's, in order to support effective teacher adaptations for instruction, which I think goes hand in hand with that reflective component, that there's parts that teachers need to have, things like content knowledge or procedural knowledge or pedagogical knowledge, that those will obviously enhance the instruction. And I that's something I've been thinking a lot about lately is teachers are decision makers. There's no way around it. They are making dozens and dozens of decisions during a reading block. And so what pool of knowledge are they making those decisions from? And I think that's what a book like this can really help support is those principles, so they're making better instructional decisions. And I think if we elevate teacher knowledge and help teachers understand what current research or where the field is at, then we can support them in implementing whatever curriculum, whatever policy, whatever the powers that be are sort of directing to do. It's a way we can, I guess, have our cake and eat it too, that we can take the materials given to us and still make it work because of that professional knowledge that teachers have and are hopefully continually developing.
I will point out that that aligns with the autonomy that we were talking about earlier, and that when teachers operate in controlled environments, that's where you get burnout and early retirement and career switchers because they feel like their hands tied, and no matter which way they turn, they can't do what's best for their kids. And there's nothing more deflating than that. So while we try to be autonomy supportive for students, we also promote autonomy support for teachers. That's not to say that we take a hands-off approach in schools, but rather elevate the profession of teaching to the status that it deserves and giving them the resources to engage in the important work that they're doing. So sorry, I just wanted to make that connection as it emerged. That's a perfect connection to make there. It's not gonna be completely free reign or independence. That's not necessarily ideal or realistic either. But there does have to be, teachers do have to have latitude to make instructional decisions, and I think supporting the organizations, district, state level, whichever, that support teachers should be interested in supporting their professional knowledge and not just implementation aspects of it, but helping their ongoing development. In fact, Doctors Amy Morwood and Julie Ankrum, they quote Linda Darling Hammond at the opening of their chapter, and this is the last chapter in the book.
I love the quote from Dr. Darling Hammond. There was then and still is now a too common belief that if you had a good undergraduate education, you could go and teach. But there's so much more to learn. And it seems to me the way that's framed is really the undergraduates it's almost like the triage kit of like, you're good enough to go into a classroom and start to make literacy happen, but it's there is so much more to learn from that. So, I'm curious this book's, a month, 6 weeks old. How do you foresee this book being used by schools or districts or in individual teachers? How would you say this would be a great way to use this book to support professional learning?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We feel like the variety of topics and the expertise that the chapter authors bring has a lot to offer both pre-service and in-service teachers. I think it's a great complement for practicing teachers who are wanting to engage in that lifelong learning. We have very current, up-to-date research that we asked chapter authors to give the snapshot of their principle based upon research right now. So the most up-to-date research for practicing teachers who have a lot of the knowledge, but can enhance their understanding of what it means to teach in these different areas. And we see it as a great resource for pre-service teachers too. I like to think that it's a really approachable text. As we noted earlier in this podcast, the chapters are intentionally relatively short. We try to be succinct so it doesn't become overwhelming, but it also really gets to the point. Another challenge we gave to chapter authors was to make it highly pragmatic. The idea that this is we don't want theoretical type stuff. We, of course, value theory and we can use theory, but we need to make that leap into practice. What are the applications to the classroom that teachers are going to face in practicing teachers' case tomorrow, or pre-service teachers' case, in the next year or so. So we want it to be relevant, timely, fully up to date, and also able to help all teachers enhance their craft. And we're so thankful to the chapter authors because the work and the knowledge they put into this book have exceeded our own expectations and vision that we started out with when we just had a nugget of an idea and a draft table of contents. And I think they really knocked it out of the park. So I think that this text has something to offer teachers at all stages and can help reach all kids. That is a central theme of the book, is all students deserve the right to high quality literacy instruction. And this book has lots of information on how to do that. And we're forever indebted to the chapter authors for helping our vision come to life in that way.
And I might add that all teachers are entitled to, deep theoretical, pedagogical, instructional, content area knowledge to make that happen. Those two absolutely are going to go hand in hand, and I think this book will do wonders with making that happen. So again, the book is titled Principles of Effective Literacy Instruction, Grades K-5, and I picked mine up on Amazon, but I'm sure it's available through lots of different retailers or outlets. So Dr. Parsons, we appreciate you joining us on the Teaching Literacy podcast. Final question for you is, what do you think makes a great teacher?
And what a great question. But I feel like we've sort of talked around that for the last half hour or so. But I think an effective teacher is highly knowledgeable, highly motivated. And when I say knowledgeable, they're knowledgeable about content and pedagogy, and equally as importantly, their students. Teachers know their kids better than anyone other than their families, just due to the amount of time they spend with them, and also how they get to know them through the work they create, the conversations they have, the instructional activities they complete, the side conversations during, transitions as they're walking to lunch or recess. Teachers really get to know kids, and it's that deep knowledge of kids as well as instruction and content that is absolutely essential for an effective teacher. And I think effective teachers are flexible and adaptive in that they are able to operate in the highly complex and unpredictable nature of classrooms. And that's no easy task, and it's not a straightforward profession or straightforward act trying to teach students all these different subjects in 6 short hours each day. And yet I'm consistently awed at the teachers who are able to do it. But that's what I think a teacher is knowledgeable, committed to growth. You never figure it out. You never perfect it. So being open-minded, being honest with oneself, being willing to learn, even if you're, been doing this for approaching 2 decades like I am, understanding that you haven't figured it out, and that you're always getting smarter. And, it's hard work, but ultimately the kids are worth it. And again, I'm just so thankful that we have so many professionals across the nation who engage in this work exceptionally and too often thanklessly across the United States.
Dr. Seth Parsons, thank you for joining us on the Teaching Literacy Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, what a great conversation with Dr. Parsons. Very grateful that he would join us on the show. And also a shout out to all those chapter authors, too, that were able to collaborate and work together to develop such a fantastic final product. Again, I highly encourage you to go out and pick up this book. It's very accessible to practitioners, and it's meant to really support teaching and learning within the classroom. So my 2 cents before the end of the show is the first one. I want to talk about that word principles. We talked about it at the outset of the episode. It's something that has really stuck and hung with me. And this idea of being able to give teachers a framework to work within. Right, and I've used this talk with some other teachers before, where perhaps sometimes we try to give teachers a blueprint of exactly what needs to happen in a classroom or what needs to happen with students, but perhaps we need to be giving teachers more of a compass, where we're giving them sets of principles that they can use as a guide to support literacy learning within their individual situation. And so that idea of principles has really stuck with me. I think that can be an effective vehicle for supporting professional learning. Which brings me to my second point, and my second point is this idea of professional learning. If you are listening to this podcast and you've listened to previous episodes of this podcast, then I can full-heartedly say that you are a believer in ongoing professional learning, as am I, as very clearly Dr. Parsons is. And so thinking about how could a book like this be used for ongoing professional learning. Professional learning, it can be self-driven by an individual teacher, but I think there's a lot of power in when a faculty or when co-teachers or a grade level or even at a district level, when there is a system for professional learning. And that's what Dr. Parsons talked about, is giving teachers some agency to sort of be able to self-select and determine what they need to learn. But sometimes it's not. I think it's because teachers don't want to know more. I think sometimes it's just so hard to curate really quality materials that are sort of hard-hitting and can support language and literacy development within a classroom. That's something I'm thinking about with this book, is how perhaps could this book be used for my ongoing professional learning or for some of my colleagues' professional learning. And I would encourage you to do the same, is how could a book like this, that's a collection of short chapters that focuses on specific topics, everything from reading fluency to organizing a classroom to providing student autonomy, wide range of topics, how could that be used for ongoing professional learning in your professional situation? I think there's a lot of power in that, of being able to systematize our professional learning so that we can do the best job we can to support those young readers in our classroom. That's all I have for the show today. Thank you very much for listening and for your ongoing support. As always, if you want to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts, that'd be great. I'd probably appreciate it even more if you just share it with a colleague, especially an episode like this where there's a physical product that can go and refer to read more about. So if you found this episode valuable, reach out to a colleague and say, hey, you might want to check this out. And there's a book that's associated with it that you might consider picking up as well. Thank you very much. Till next time, let's go and teach reading just a little bit better.